Saludos, mis amigos. ¿Cómo están ustedes todos? Estoy aquí con el Jeremy y el Gary. Sorry.
Yeah. That was actually pretty good.
No, it wasn't.
Well, hey, it sounded like you were trying to read the weather a bit.
What's going on, everyone? Hope everybody's doing good today. So, Jeremy.
Yes, sir.
We're going to actually start.
Again.
So, Jeremy. Yes, sir.
All right, don't make me get down.
Oh, man.
Already hear him.
Because he's very vocal today, but hopefully he could help out with the introduction of today's video. Annunaki. Do you guys
I know a little bit.
Yeah, I bet you do. Mister, the Annunaki were a group of, am I saying this correctly? Deities in the ancient
deities, yeah.
Deities.
Thank you, Wikipedia.
My tongue don't really let me say certain words. In the ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, and Babylonian pantheons.
Babylonian.
Damn, that is a mouthful.
So here's the thing, though, just quickly before we go into that. What happened to Sumeria? What happened to Assyrians?
Sumer.
Isn't it now like modern day Iraq?
Yeah, it's that kind of area, yeah.
I was thinking more like a group of people, not a genre.
Well,
sorry for the Americans. So Iraq.
Yeah, if you're going back to the Sumerians, you're going back to the times of Atlantis and the Lemurians and stuff like that, and they're lost civilizations. I mean, I'm not saying they're gone, but it's even like the Ninth Legion and what have you in Scotland and everything. Nobody knows what happened to the last Legion, but the chances are they were left up there for that long. They ended up just intermingling with the locals and they just disappeared. It's probably the same for the Sumerians. They just ended up spreading their wings and things like that. But what's been left behind are these Sumerian texts, which tell the stories of the Bible, but long before the Bible existed, maybe. The whole story of Jesus, and this is where we're going to either make friends or we're not going to make friends, is basically an exact retelling of a Sumerian story, which Jeremy has a little bit of information on.
Which one?
Enki.
Oh, I haven't really got a story on it. I was just reading a few of your notes, and it was saying that it was that Enki was a derivation of Jesus.
Yeah. For Jesus.
Yeah, exactly right. But then you also look at the name Anunnaki, and Fernando's probably read this as well. The Anunnaki are deities in the pantheon descendants of An and Ki, the god of the heavens and the goddess of earth, which is a primary function was to decree the fates of humanity.
And you break it down into its historic kind of thing. The Annunaki are supposed to be the ones that come from Nibiru, which is that planet on a 3,600-year orbit, which is when it comes close, they have the ability to move to Earth. So they come from the heavens. If you go back 3,500 years ago, when because we're getting close to that time again, apparently. And when they came in, they would have been from the heavens, coming from space. That's what they are, and they were supposed to be the giants. And then you start talking about the Nephilim and things like that, and they ended up mating with the human women, which is possibly where this Anunnaki, come about. And it leads to a whole load of different stories, but there's so much out there now which is sort of leading to the possibility of something actually being true to the story. Don't know how much, but definitely parts of it.
Well, I mean, it just sounds like everything, I'm sure you guys heard of it, of how, the pyramids were built. These giant beings, are we talking about these kind of the same people creating the pyramids? And,
yes.
In a way, how all of the pyramids were actually positioned, it's, it's almost like a map or a pinpoint, or almost like the X marks the spot in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I mean...
And to what the pyramids can do.
Mm-hmm. Power generation is number one.
Yeah, power generation. Then you've got to thank them for things like the canals, first signs of language and writing and speaking. And none of this gets taught in schools. I know it's hearsay, but you learn about all these other things that really don't mean a lot, but they're leaving out things like this.
Well, there's a good science fiction film out there with Gerard Butler in it, and it's called The Gods of Egypt. And if you look at that,
very good movie.
That is very reminiscent of
this
story of the Anunnaki, with the giants who were perceived as the gods, and how the humans worshipped them and everything. And of course, Ra, the sun god, up there in space, it's so close to the stories of the Anunnaki that you can't help but think, are they all different retellings of the same stories?
Yeah. So as I was saying before, the Anunnaki are believed to be the offspring of An, and the earth goddess that Samuel Noah Kramer identifies as Ki with the Sumerian mother goddess Ninhursag, stating that they were originally the same figure. The oldest Anunnaki was Enlil, the god of air and chief god of the Sumerian pantheon. The Sumerians believed that until Enlil was born, heaven and earth were inseparable. Then Enlil split heaven and earth into two and carried away with the earth, while his father An carried away with the sky.
Jeez,
Rather
that sounds so much. Yeah, that sounds so much like,
the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, did they have? Do you know? I'm just jumping into this cesspool of information. And by the way, let me just point out that there is maybe. No offense, Gary, but how can you hold so much information? Because you probably don't even have nothing written or nothing in front of your screen, and you know so much.
It's watching videos and reading.
I'm old.
Well, that's where the no offense comes in, because my God, I mean, a lot of these things I haven't even heard of.
Well, they were thought to possess extraordinary powers and were often envisioned as being tremendously in physical size.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but we're not going to go there.
Maybe Gary's an Anunnaki, shapeshifted.
Hey, yeah, it's you know what? I'm gonna keep the next comments to myself.
So it says that the deities typically wore malam, an ambiguous substance which covered them in terrifying splendor. Malam could also be worn by heroes, kings, giants, and even demons. The effect of seeing a deity's malam has on a human is described as ni, the word for physical tingling of the flesh. Deities were almost always depicted wearing horned caps consisting of up to 7 superimposed pairs of ox horns. They were also sometimes depicted wearing clothes with elaborate decorative gold, silver, and ornaments sewn into them.
See, when you hear about that description, it comes very close to talking about the Norse gods.
Yes.
You're talking Odin, you're talking Thor, and all the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
Thor, very similar. And when they were supposed to be giants as well, you know what I mean? Well, Thor actually wasn't supposed to be that tall, but they were all very powerful. And obviously, the Rainbow Bridge come down from the sky, and that's where the Norse gods came from. It's still coming from the sky. You're talking about different things, be it a portal, some sort of a beaming technology, whatever it may be. And then you look at, obviously, the Egyptian gods. They come down from the sky. And then there are gods that we don't really know a lot about. Now, if you go to, like, Nazca, Peru, and you've got the Nazca lines there, they were creating these giant pictographs that you can't even make out from the land, but there are birds and different animals. You can only see them from the sky, but these things are that old that nothing was flying back then. So who were they making these pictures for? Who were they inviting in? And what are these runways that are like miles long for? You know what I mean? There are what is perceived to be runways. All these ancient civilizations, it all leads to there definitely been something in the sky that came and visited us.
Well, you think, like you're saying, Gary, before, like, it's all written in term before Jesus was even alive, or before Christ. They've found figures that have been carved circa 2130 BC. The earliest known usages of the term Anunnaki come from inscriptions from 2144 to 2124 BC. Like there's texts, It's crazy. Like when you actually research what they've made and found, it's just like, hang on a second, they're simple things that we take for granted. And these guys, 2000 plus BC, were doing it then, and we struggle to make things now.
Yeah. Now, we revert everything back to a movie or a TV show or something like that. Now, you talk about these different gods and things like that. They are just beings from another world. Now, the prime example of that is the entire Stargate universe. Again, Ra, the sun god, comes into it. They were just, obviously in that show, there were alien beings that infested the basic, the bodies of humans and things like that because they were easy to repair. When you look at the actual mythology of different civilizations, they were always classed as giants. And I don't know how much truth there is to it, but they reckon they found remains of giants. Now, I'm not talking 20 feet tall, but there are certainly some well over 10 feet tall, 12 feet tall. Does that tie into early versions of like Bigfoot, you know what I mean? Or one of those type civilizations? Because the talk now, a lot of the talk going around about Bigfoot and the Yowie is that they could be possibly an interdimensional being of some sort. Well, what's not to say they're just average size, and the humans or their equivalent of humans are about the same size as them. If they come through, they're going to be seen as gods. I mean, you go back to the Bible, you've got the the whole story of the throwing the rock and killing the giant and stuff like that. It's all in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had the with the Anunnaki, they had the seven gods, Enlil, Enki, Nihusag, Nana, Utu, Inanna, and that was it. Yeah.
Jeez. And you'll be surprised if you go back through a lot of these names and everything. There are a lot of similarities to what Christianity now called demon. Like there was one that you mentioned before that sounds very similar to Lilith.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And what's not to say they weren't painted in a certain way? Well, Lilith has to be the first wife of Lucifer and the demon, first of the mother of demons, basically. But she was one of these deities from a different religion. So, of course, if they're trying to rewrite religion, they're going to write these other religions as being the bad.
Also, I've got here in front of me, virtually every major deity in the Sumerian pantheon was regarded as a patron of a specific city and was expected to protect that city's interest. The deity was believed to permanently reside within the city's temple. One text mentions as many as 50 Anunnaki associated with the city of Eridu, and Eonans descended into the netherworld. There are 7 Anunnaki who reside within the underworld and serve as judges. Inanna stands before trial from her attempt to take over the underworld. They deem her guilty of hubris and condemned her to death. Major deities in Sumerian mythology were associated with specific celestial bodies. Inanna was believed to be the planet Venus. Utu was believed to be the sun. Nana was the moon and was identified with all the stars of the equatorial sky. It goes on and on and on, and it all makes some sort of sense.
I mean, the one and only time I even heard of the name Lilith, it was doing some research, and it has something to do with demonic.
She's the mother of demons.
Entity. That is wild.
Hence the reason in Diablo you have Lilith, the game.
Lilith was the first woman before Eve. If you go right back, Lilith was the first woman before Eve, but she didn't play ball, so she was struck away, and then Eve came into being. But
so, talking about Adam and Eve, this is going a little bit off topic, and I mean no hate or anything. I've got no hate or anything between this, but knowing what I know of a certain group of people, why couldn't Adam and Eve been of Asian descent? They would have eaten a snake and we all would have been fine. That's not even racist. Like they would have. Generally they would have.
But you break it all down.
Everyone would have been fine and happy.
With what we're talking about. Okay, so you talk about the snake. And the first humans. What's not snake's a reptile? What's not to say it's
reptilians? It says it in the Bible.
Does it really? Reptilians is in the Bible?
Well, what do you call a snake?
I'm putting a creative spin on it. But hang on, no. But in saying that, the snake talked.
It did. apparently.
What language did it speak?
I mean, you would assume Slytherin. He just made that up.
No, you think about it. Adam and Eve were the first two there. There was a snake that talked. How did they understand him?
So what is so do any of you guys know what was the first language ever spoken?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. The first written
language ever reported.
Well, you would think.
Now that changes it, because the first language ever, nobody would ever know.
No.
Because it was Adam, Eve, and a snake.
And then Cain and Abel and stuff like that. But you think about it, if the Sumerian texts are the oldest known text, well, the oldest known verbal language would have to be the same, you would think. But that's just that we have proof of. There's nothing to say that there weren't languages long before that. We're only going back 3,000 or 4,000 years. I mean, even the Egyptians, they're probably going back further than that when you're talking about the Sumerians, because the Egyptians go back between 5,000 and 10,000 years, depending on the experts that you listen to and you talk about the pyramids and things. But they're predated by the Sumerians. And what's not to say, again, you bring into play the Atlanteans and the Lemurians, the high level of technology involved in building these gleaming skyscrapers, that is what's referred to. They would have to have written plans, and they would have drawn blueprints to build these buildings. And they were supposed to have had flying machines as well. You're not going to have all of that without a written language, you'd need code for a lot of that stuff.
That's the thing with the Annunaki as well. They said that they came from the undiscovered planet Nibiru, who came to Earth from around 500,000 years ago.
Well, all I'm going to say is that, when we first started talking about this to record this episode, I just Googled, Annunaki, just to get a little bit familiar. And I just Googled what is the first language ever spoken. And it all ties up to the same thing. Historians and linguists generally agree that the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Egyptian are the oldest languages with a clear written record. All three are extinct, and they are living descendants that can carry the language to the next generation.
Now, you and I talked about doing a show some time ago, which we never actually recorded, but what we are talking about now ties directly into that. Now, you go. The different languages about the different interpretations of the Anunnaki and stuff like that. Some say they were the angels that came down, and what happened was they ended up spending that much time down here because they liked it down here, that they ended up mating with humans, and that's where the Nephilim came from. And then as a punishment, God threw them all to earth like fallen angels. Now, remember we were talking about before, we were going to do an episode on how many meteorite strikes are there around the world, and the number was 200. And then if you go into the documented fact, how many angels were cast down to earth? 200.
And there's also like that tower was it like in Egypt or like in this, there's like this beautiful tower, and it has seats with a middle platform, and it was like 200 seats.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I actually just came across a part here. The Anunnaki hybridized their species with Homo erectus via IVF in order to create humans as a slave species of miners. This guy also claimed the Anunnaki were forced to temporarily leave Earth's surface and orbit the planet when Antarctic glaciers melted, causing a great flood, which also destroyed the Anunnakis based on Earth. These had to be rebuilt, and the Anunnaki, needing more humans to help them in this massive effort, taught mankind agriculture.
Yes. And you think about it, what's not to say that great flood isn't what buried Atlantis?
So Ronald H. Fritz is an American encyclopedias historian and a writer. He also is known for criticisms of pseudo-historic ideas. According to this guy, Sitchin, the Anunnaki built the pyramids and the other monumental structures from around the ancient world that ancient astronaut theorists consider so impossible to build without highly advanced technologies and they expanded on this mythological in later works, including The Stairway to Heaven, The Wars of the Gods, and Men, and In the End Days, Armageddon, and Prophecy of the Return.
You're talking about Zachariah Sitchin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Nice.
He predicted that the Anunnakis would return to Earth possibly as soon as 2012, corresponding to the end of the Mesoamerican long count calendar. And that's another thing. The Anunnaki are supposedly responsible for calendars off of the sun and moon phases. There's too much stuff that has been said about them that they can kind of point towards that makes too much sense not to believe some of it.
The funny thing is, right, there's a lot of books that were taken out of the Bible that are considered apocryphal, and some of them do have accounts of what you are talking about right now.
What even says here, and it goes to the episode that we've recorded previously as well. David Icke, the British conspiracy theorist who has popularised the reptilian conspiracy theory, has claimed that the reptilian overlords of his theory are in fact the Anunnaki.
And that goes back to the episode we did last week. The Ark Overlords.
You guys, I mean, I'm just Googling stuff because, I cannot retain so much information. But I just Googled oldest calendar, and it all ties into the Sumerian. It's wild. It's wild.
How's this one for wild? This will blow your brains out. Please don't. Like speculation of the Anunnaki incorporates far-right views on his history, posting an Aryan master race descended by blood from the Anunnaki. It also incorporates dragons, Dracula, and draconian laws. These three elements apparently linked by one superficial linguistic similarity. He formulated views on the Anunnaki in the 1990s and written several books also.
It's funny you mentioned the draconian there, because the draconian are tied to that 20 and back story that they're out beyond the Kuiper belt, and they're the ones that are restricting our access out into the greater universe. So are they tied into the Anunnaki? Are they?
That's what it's saying.
Their home world, is their home world Nibiru, and are they the ones that are controlling everything? Have they disguised themselves?
This could have turned into a part 2 of last week's episode, really.
Well, it is starting to shape up that way.
Everything is tying in. Everything is tying in. Is wild. I mean,
it's crazy.
And this is what I've said 1,000 times about all the different topics we talk about. They all tie into each other somehow. There are threads that are always connecting everything.
3 degrees of separation.
6 degrees
the Sumerian
of separation.
calendar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
The Sumerian calendar dates back to around 21 BC. It consists of 12 lunar months of 29 or 30 days. Markings on a stone pillar at a 12,000-year-old archaeological site is found in Turkey. And it's the world's oldest solar map.
I think we're making Fernando a believer.
I mean, not just a believer, but it is opening my eyes to a lot of how crazy everything actually connects. And just last week's episode,
do you know how much?
It's like we intentionally recorded part 2.
Yeah.
It's
like, can you imagine how many more people would pay attention in school if this was talked about?
Dude, I've long said if it wasn't due to the area, to the family, and to the culture that I was born in, I would have aced history class, because it would have been so freaking interesting. I mean, honestly,
the victor writes history.
That is amazing.
No, it's true. Break it down.
Of course,
his story,
because a dead person can't write nothing.
Exactly.
So yeah, for sure.
But they did.
I mean, history is one of the reasons why well, let me say this. Paranormal, being a paranormal investigator within the paranormal field, going to all of these amazing historical sites is the reason why I now, as an adult, underestimated back when I was younger history. Because all of this stuff is amazing.
The problem is, for mainstream society to talk about a full grasp of history as we're talking about at the moment, they have to acknowledge the supernatural. They have to acknowledge the possibility of beings from another world, which means they have to acknowledge alien. They have to acknowledge interdimensional. They have to acknowledge superior, more powerful beings than what we were capable of back then. And if they're still advancing at the same rate that we're advancing, what are they capable of now? That becomes a very frightening thing to teach kids at school. So it gets wiped from the curriculum. It gets buried away. The church is the dominant belief structure on the planet. Control. And that's what it's all about, because the original, this isn't a bash at religion, but the original concept of religion is about a way to conduct yourself and conduct your life. It's not about going to a building and worship within a building and pay them to have you talk to God. It's something every single one of us can do if there is a God out there or whatever. There's definitely a consciousness of something out there, but I refuse to use the word God because I'm not a religious person. But the concept I do have a grasp of. And
so what would you call the Anunnakis then?
Well, I wouldn't call them gods. They're extraterrestrial. They're an extraterrestrial entity. You know, they were perceived as angels. They were perceived as this. They were perceived as that. But break it all down. They were extraterrestrial. They were from outside Earth. So extraterrestrial is the correct terminology. Now, Eric von Daniken wrote the story, you know, the book, The Chariots of the Gods. If you go back to the way they talked back then, their vehicles, especially in ancient Rome and back to the Mesopotamian and the Sumerian things, their vehicles that they used were chariots. So the chariots of the gods were the chariots that the gods came down in. And you've seen it in a lot of the artwork, a lot of the sculptures, a lot of the stuff from back then. They were depicted as lights coming down from the sky, or craft coming down from the sky with big fire or whatever the case may be, which they were alien spacecraft coming down. So anything coming from up there were gods. And they were coming in their vehicles, which were their chariots.
Wow.
So that's how they perceive it.
Wow.
And you break it down. You break it down like that, and that's not something they're going to want to talk about. I mean, I would have aced science. I would have aced history if this was all on the thing, but I still had the imagination back then because I'd seen things as a child when I was still in primary school which set my whole life on this course. So it was always there, and every time we got to unleash our creativeness, I got looked at like I was an absolute bloody weirdo, because this was long before the internet and I was sprouting this shit out a long time ago. And they just go, yeah, no, Gary, no, settle down, boy, you know. And that's what they do. They just poo-poo so many people, and they basically intimidate them into silence, whether it be an aggressive way of doing it or whether it just be a subliminal, you're in trouble, no, don't talk.
Ooh, subliminal like again.
That's wild. That's
wild. Control.
Because, you know, like if you really go back and, you know, my thought process kind of, you know, just bring this information onto my screen right now. Because I started thinking, you know, what if, you know, like if Jesus and God and all of these, you know, beings that are, you know, worshipped from a religion, I was thinking, let's take these guys into perspective and put them on our planet, right? They must have some way to tell time or use a calendar of some sorts. So Jesus used the Hebrew calendar, which is described in Leviticus 23. Hebrew calendar is a solar lunar calendar that's based on everything what we were talking about. So at one point,
so the Sumerian
just
calendar,
like Scientology, like if today was like you know, like we all have ID cards and driver's licenses, like it would have been just like Scientology. Jesus was just a regular person, and he did something outrageous. Average. And he did something outrageous that people thought it was wow, you know, and he just became a god. So, well, not really a god, right? Like he's just a son of a god, right? So,
did he self-profess himself as the son of God, being that he's the son of Annunaki?
Man, we're about to like blow fart on a bunch of
It's
people.
not, using that analogy, it'll be no different from Bill Gates and Microsoft. He bought that product off a shelf.
Anyway, guys, we are out of time.
Again?
Unfortunately, we might have to go back to a third episode on this.
No, we will. Because there's so much more stuff. I've got pages and pages in front of me as well. There is so much more stuff when they introduce a sixth generation of the gods that work beside the Anunnakis. It's crazy.
Well, maybe we might have to go to part 3 next week.
Yeah, I think we do.
Everything ties in.
On that,
anybody could Google oldest language. Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
Yeah, we're going, dude. Settle down.
And look how excited Fernando was like, "Oh, I don't know much about," and now he's like, "Yeah, man."
Yeah. So everybody, stay tuned. Subscribe, like, comment, share, because we will be back next week to possibly conclude or just add another part to this.
I think it's going to be a several part. It's going to be another few more episodes.
It's just like the Saw movie. They're just going to keep on coming.
Except it's not going to get worse with time.
Yeah, it's just going to get more interesting.
Anyway, on that, we do have to go. So I will see you next week. And, we will all see you next week. Where we will continue this conversation, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot more study happening as soon as we get off here. So it's all going to be prepped for next week. I'll just shut up and I'll let these guys do the talking.
Catch you later.
See yous.
Bye.